cast down to hell, and then stories of the Son of Man or Jesus being the one who eventually come to save humanity from their sins. Well, in John Milton's story, all of these events happen within like a week of each other. And as is typical of several of these epic poems, it begins right in the middle of the action. So the story's just going to throw us into the deep end, and we'll get context as we go on. So if in the beginning you feel confused and need more clarity, that's the point. The story opens with Milton calling on a muse to help him tell the story of creation. Muses are something that are commonly seen again in a lot of ancient poetry, who would help the writer properly portray whatever they were trying to explain. But in this story, because again Milton is sticking to more Christian values, the muse he calls upon is the Holy Spirit to help him write what he's about to write. So throughout this story, as a muse is mentioned, it can be seen as a form of prayer. With that, our narrative begins immediately after the war in heaven. It opens with the image of Satan and a third of the angels that chose to follow him in the war against God, falling from heaven down into the pits of hell. It says they fell for 9 days, and then after landing in the lake of fire in hell, they all lay there in silence for another 9 days. They lay there in agony. For several of them, this is the first time that they've ever experienced pain. The realm that they've fallen into is dark and only illuminated by the fire they're consumed in. All of them are still adorned in armor and holding weapons and banners from their battle. Until after 9 days, Satan decides to speak to his second in command. That second in command is a fallen angel named Beelzebub. Beelzebub, which translates to the Lord who flies, is a name that is often associated with Satan directly. Several historical records point to the idea that at one time there was a pagan deity known as Beelzebub outside of, the devil. And some even say that Beelzebub was synonymous with the Canaanite god known as Baal. Either way, this entity next to Satan to be a false god throughout the Bible to convince people to kill their babies and all that fun stuff. So Satan begins to whisper to Beelzebub and essentially declare his hatred for God in heaven. He says that all that this defeat has done is made him more furious and steadfast in his resolve. Again, we don't know exactly what happened yet, but we'll get there. Satan continues to talk about how powerful he is and how he can wage war against God forever. He continues to say, referring to God, that glory never shall his wrath or might extort for me. Another interesting detail throughout this monologue and the rest of the story is Satan and the other demons never refer to God as God. They always refer to him as him, or the one above heaven, or so forth. Satan then says that he will never end his war against the, quote, tyranny of heaven. And Beelzebub suggests Satan should maybe slow his roll just a little bit. But Satan, undeterred, says that here now in hell he will continue his fight, and that he will make a, quote, heaven of hell, or a hell of heaven. Clawing his way up on shore, Satan says that he will continue to ever do evil against God, and then says to Beelzebub what is essentially his motto of the story: it is better to reign in hell than to live in heaven. Satan and Beelzebub begin to fly to a far-off shore. During this flight, Milton describes the incredible size of Satan himself. He says his form is closer to a ship than that of a man, and his spear is closer to a tree than any human weapon. Throughout the story, we'll see the characters transform a lot, but in their more natural form, they're more akin to a mountain than a person. Once they get to shore, Satan tells the army to follow him over. This army that follows him to shore consists of millions of fallen angels. Again, a third of all the armies of heaven. It says the leaders of this army have had their names removed from heaven. And while their holy names have been forgotten, they will one day be given names by humanity. Among these soldiers and fallen angels, one day be known as Moloch, Belial, Ashtaroth, Dagon, Azazel, and Mammon. All of these names are either associated with demons who in the Old Testament appeared to humanity as gods and made them do evil, to famous demons who would wage war against the church and God himself, as well as several names that are mentioned that are either the princes of hell or predominantly feature in a lot of biblical tradition as the heads of certain sins, such as the 7 deadly sins. And reading this part, I was over the moon. Like, for me being a weird biblical nerd, like the way I am, I approached this story the way it had been described to me online, like, okay, we're going to read a sad boy Satan fanfic, woohoo. But when I got to the part about the armies of defeated hell crawling out of the fire to shore, and all of the names that are mentioned are these demonic entities that either occur in the Bible or in oral history at some point. I was ecstatic. This was the insanity I was hoping for. It says, as they crawl out, they all pick up their broken spears and their fallen banners of battle. Seeing the side of their defeat, it says that Satan almost feels bad for making everyone go through this. Keyword being almost, as he won't do anything about it. He just more so resists the situation. With Satan's army gathered on the shores of hell, that's a great phrase anyway, they begin to plan their next move. Some suggest that they should fly up right now and keep fighting. Others say they should take their time. But at the moment, Satan decides that they need a sort of palace, because of course he does. So all of the army starts to dig, and they begin to find precious metals like gold. During this time, Mammon, one of the army's leaders, goes around encouraging them to find all the gold that they can. Mammon is a demonic figure associated with greed, and in Milton's characterization of him in the story, he says that while Mammon was an angel in heaven, he was always looking down at the roads paved with gold. It's interesting, you always hear these names of demonic or satanic entities and just always assume they were that way, but if you follow the biblical belief that is followed by most Christians, at one point they had to be angels. So Milton's characterization of them as such is pretty interesting. So with their gold and metals, they build a giant palace across the landscape of hell, a palace known as Pandemonium. So while I was reading this, I was like, oh cool, the palace after the word for chaos, right? No, it turns out the word Pandemonium comes from Paradise Lost. It translates to all demons in Greek. So Milton named this palace of the demons all demons. And then from this story, the word Pandemonium was born. This palace or temple that they built for themselves is massive. It contains millions of angels. And I don't mention the artwork I use in these videos a whole lot, like for the Divine Comedy, I just use Gustav because I love his stuff. And I'm doing the same here, but I have to mention some of the artwork for Pandemonium is some of the coolest artwork I've ever seen. These miraculous structures that are highlighted by the flames of hell around them, almost to point out the absurdity and uselessness of their construction. It's just beautiful storytelling through imagery. And speaking of imagery, as soon as Pandemonium's completed, Satan enters inside with the demons, and they all sit atop golden thrones. So now gathered here in the pits of hell in an altar to themselves, they begin to plan their next move. Satan leads the conversation, saying that heaven is not lost, and surely they have some way to fight back. The first one to speak is Moloch. Moloch is described as a brute and one of the fiercest warriors of, well, it used to be heaven, but now it's hell. Moloch is full bore. They immediately have to fight back. He wants war and vengeance now. It's not really explained a lot throughout the story, but the concept of annihilation is mentioned, and it's described as being something that God himself has to do directly to a living thing. And it's kind of vaguely hinted at being a ceasing of consciousness, so like a non-afterlife or renewing form of death. And Moloch says it would be better to face annihilation than to just sit here in hell. Belial, another infamous demonic entity, tells Moloch that he should maybe slow his roll a little bit, because as Belial says, they all got beat pretty bad, and it would probably be a bad idea to just try the same thing over again. And then proceeds to tell everyone that they should count their losses, because at least they're still, existent. Mammon then proposes the third option. He says that heaven is totally overrated, and they probably can't go back to it now anyway. So why not continue to build up hell itself, and then they can make an empire that could rival heaven. With this, everyone seems to cheer and like the idea of building up their own glory within hell. All except Satan and Beelzebub, who stayed silent this whole time. Beelzebub then speaks and says that this is a stupid idea because they're not really free at all, they're just jailed. And they can build golden palaces and think that they're kings as much as they want, but they're essentially locked in a box. So it's foolish to think this empire can mean anything for as long as they're trapped. It's now that the primary plot of our story kicks off, as while Beelzebub is speaking, he mentions that before they left heaven, they heard that God was creating a new world, a world called Earth, with a new creature called man. continues and says that whatever this amazing creature is only as powerful as the angels. And they know the angel strategy won't work because, again, seed line and fire for 9 days. So instead, what if they hurt God by destroying his creation? And then from there, they can take over the earth and make a great empire. With this, everyone agrees and says it's a perfect idea. With that, Beelzebub says that they need a volunteer. Someone who can go to Earth, one, see if they can even access it, and two, if they can corrupt it to open a gateway for everyone else. So of course, Satan, who we're going to find out later is planning this all along, stands up and offers himself to be the volunteer to go to Earth and try to corrupt man. He valiantly tells his followers that if he's going to be their leader, then he might as well act like him.
Macy's is the go-to gift destination to find the perfect gifts for your loved ones. They have so many different styles that reflect each of my unique family members individually. Holiday gifting features Macy's Holiday Gift Finder, which they've broken it down for you already.
Everyone cheers his departure, and as he's walking out of Pandemonium, he tells them to continue to build because they're probably going to need a palace here as well. As they all clear out of Pandemonium, it says that several of the demons come across these giant beasts and dragons along the floors of hell, so make it that way you will. So Satan begins to fly off to leave hell and try to find Earth, and eventually he comes across the exit of hell. Hell has 9 gates, 3 of brass, 3 of iron, and 3 of rock. The very construction of these gates is a blasphemy of the gates of heaven. When Satan gets to the gate of hell, there are 2 figures guarding it. One of them is a figure whose top half resembles a beautiful woman, but her lower half is like a dragon snake thing. And then it says around her waist are these violent biting dogs, similar to Cerberus. And I don't know, after reading it a few times, if the dogs are like walking around her or if they're physically inside her. I think it's both. And the other figure guarding the gate is only described as a large, horrible, shadowy shape. It's a massive dark figure made of void that whenever it steps, the ground around it trembles. Satan asks to pass through the gate, and the shadow figure says that he needs to learn his place and suffer in hell like he's supposed to. Satan, who at this point is very much over any tomfoolery, says that he doesn't have time for it and they should just let him through the gate. However, during the argument that ensues, both of the figures refer to Satan as Father. This catches Satan off guard, and he asks them to clarify and why they're calling him Dad. The Medusa figure says that her name is Sin, and that she was conceived at the moment that Satan considered to rebel against God while in heaven. That rebellion of Satan being the universe's first sin, and this figure is the embodiment of it. That's why she appears the way she does. Much like sin, at first it seems as a beautiful, attractive entity, but whenever you view the whole of it, you realize it's just death and destruction. And speaking of death and destruction, Sin says that while she was in heaven, again after Satan had created her, her presence began to tempt the other angels, who would then convert to Satan's side. This continued buildup of sin caused her to give birth to a new entity, that entity being the shadow figure on the other side of the gate, known as Death. So through Satan's original pride and thoughts of overthrowing God, he created sin. And through sin's prevalence throughout heaven, sin created death. There's a lot of mockery presented between what Satan does and what God does. We'll see scenes in heaven later that involve God and Jesus, but we're already seeing the groundwork of that dynamic. Satan offers to be the heroic sacrifice to go to earth so that everyone can have what they want. Again, a parallel to God in Christ. He now stands here with sin and death, both his creations, as an unholy trinity, and even the setup of having this grand throne room and palace in hell. Everything that Satan does seems to be a sort of mirror image of what he knows to be power and glory. However, it's his motives and application that we'll see throughout the story that separate him from the sinless grace or power of God. Sin continues her story and says that whenever the angels fell from heaven, sin and death were cast out as well. And as they were cast out, sin was given the keys to the gates of hell and told to never open it. You're probably asking yourself, why did God or the angels give sin the keys to hell? And we'll talk about that later. So after hearing all of that, Satan's like, well, that's weird. Say, I got a deal. What if you let me through that gate, I'll let you two come with me, eventually. And immediately the two forget their post to keep the gate locked, because as soon as Satan says they can come with him to this new earth, they get excited, and sin immediately opens the gate. Milton refers to the key and the opening of the gate as the sad instrument of all our woe. The gate opens into a sea of raw chaos. It's said later in the story that God built the earth using raw chaos, or essentially raw energy, to put the world and the firmament around it together. So here, outside of hell itself, is just like a cloud of nothingness. Satan leaps into the nothingness trying to fly, but immediately starts to fall. It seems that outside of this realm of creation, he has no power. But just as he's falling, a great wind blows him upwards, and he continues to glide through empty space of chaos by random winds. Why does sin have the key to the gate? How is Satan conveniently getting to earth? Hypothetical questions that I may or may not answer. We'll find out. As he's getting blown around, Satan comes to a giant figure made of this dark energy that identifies himself as chaos itself. Satan offers him the same deal. He's like, hey, if you tell me where Earth is, you can come with me. Chaos is like, oh, it's that way. And Satan just kind of blows along that path. As Satan leaves, death and sin begin to use the chaos material around them to physically build a bridge from hell to earth. Eventually, as Satan continues along this path for an undetermined amount of time, he eventually sees that he's nearing God's new world, earth. At this point, we then cut to heaven and see God and Jesus sitting on their throne. Now, it's debated a lot throughout Christianity when Jesus was created, if he was created because God exists outside of time. So a lot of people say that Jesus is eternal and has always existed apart from God, but at the same time, Jesus said, I and the Father are one, so they're not really separate at all. And I'm not here to discuss all that. All you need to know is that in Milton's story, Jesus was created like last week, but he's one with God, so he has all of the omnipotent and knowledge of God himself. So God and Jesus are on the throne, and they're watching earth, specifically a creation filled with uninterrupted joy and unbroken love. And then as they're sitting there, they see Satan approaching. I can only picture the visual of God and Jesus, and then just off to the side, there's a little dude just getting closer. So since God is omniscient and exists outside of time, God sees everything that is going to happen, ever. So God looks at this and says that eventually his creation will betray him. He also mentions that he could in fact stop it right now if he wanted to, but the purpose of this creation was the concept of love, so that they could experience love and love freely. And love does not exist without the concept of free will. Something cannot be loved if it's just for subjugation. It has to be a willing desire to follow something else. And in this moment, God knows that humanity is resigned to its own choosing. God says that humanity will not be wholly punished. They will just choose to no longer be divine creatures, and therefore cannot act in divinity. They will know suffering. They will know corruption. They will know everything that they shouldn't have to. The Son, aka Jesus, asks God if all of humanity is lost. And God says that some will be lost and some will chase after new sin. But he also says that some will listen. And since through their free will to participate in this evil will lead them to the evils that humanity will suffer, it will be their free will and another kind of participation that will lead them back to God's side. And God says that way will be paid through a sacrifice. To which, mimicking the scene depicted earlier in hell, God asks who will volunteer. And of course, Jesus volunteers. I emphasize that to again show the duality. Satan wants to go to earth in order to conquer and in order to defile it so it can be no better than him. Whereas Jesus makes the same offering, only unlike Satan, who is trying to bring humanity down to his suffering, Jesus is trying to bring humanity up to his grace. It refers to Jesus in this moment. It says, in whom the fullness dwells of love divine, and that he himself will one day defeat Satan, death, and sin forever. Something I love about Paradise Lost is whenever you hear the concept of the story, you already know where it's going to go. Like, no one who has any concept of theology picked up the book and was like, oh, the Garden of Eden from Satan's perspective. I wonder how it turns out for that guy. Like, we all know where the story's going, just as God knows where the story's going. And it's a beautiful picture that before the fall of man ever occurred, God already had our way back prepared. But what the story does that's particularly interesting isn't the narrative. Again, we all know how that turns out. It's characterization of it. And the majority of that characterization falls on Satan. All that is truly known throughout the Bible is the idea that Satan saw himself as equal to God, and after trying to take that place, he was cast down. And here we see those ideas more fleshed out. As mentioned earlier, better to remain in hell than serve in heaven. But as the story goes on, that philosophy begins to crumble on itself, and we see Satan continue to grasp for straws to try to maintain his power, his resilience for his own cause. And in the end, just how far he's willing to justify his own suffering. So anyway, we cut back to Satan, who's making his way to Earth and lands in this lush forest. It's also at this time, and Milton doesn't do this a lot, Dante was way worse for it in his writings, but a lot of these older writers do this thing where their character's monologue will reflect their own beliefs, but not in like a natural story way, like a very just out-of-pocket announcement of ideas. And I made fun of Dante a lot for it, so it's only fair that Milton gets some too. Like, throughout Dante's Inferno, Dante would come across someone suffering in hell and being like, oh, you're burning upside down forever, but you're from a town that's not Florence? Wow, that's pretty lame. Okay. And Milton's not as bad for it, but there's a scene here that I was like, there's that Danteism. As mentioned earlier, Milton was a strong Protestant, so he was very against the Catholic Church and most governments. So Milton hated the idea of a priest talking to someone who then talks to God for you. So whenever Satan gets to Earth, heaven is right above Earth, like it can physically be seen from Earth. And Satan's just like, wow, sure would be stupid if I thought I needed to speak to someone to talk to all that. And Satan just rambles. He's like, could you imagine needing, like, I don't know, a monk or a priest even to talk to God when I can just yell and he'll hear me? That's so stupid. Which I kind of have to give Milton props for using the devil as his, like, morality megaphone. And I'm exaggerating a little bit for comedic effort, just a little bit, because he doesn't, say priest by name, just pretty much the idea of, like, it'd be dumb to need a mediary. But whenever I read this for the first time, I, read a little bit of it, and I'm like, is he saying that he's pro-priest? Because I just assumed if the devil's saying it, then I'm not supposed to fall for it. But then as I kept reading, I'm like, oh, he's doing the Dante thing, okay? Also, so Milton had this belief that, I don't want to say aliens, but pretty much aliens, the idea that perhaps different spirits or divine creatures of God exist in the stars or out in space of some sort, which was like a really controversial belief at the time. And Milton didn't even necessarily believe in it, he just thought it was kind of neat. So while Satan's standing there on Earth, he looks up at the moon, and he's like, I wonder if there's any people up there. So Satan continues walking and eventually comes to this opulent gate made of gold and diamond. Just on the other side of the gate, he sees a staircase which is identified as Jacob's ladder. One of the characters of the Old Testament, Jacob, had a vision of a ladder going up to heaven where he saw angels going up and down it. In the story, this is symbolic of the gateway that the angels take from heaven to earth. Satan jumps over says that it feels almost nostalgic as the light of it reminds him of heaven. And he reminisces that as he'll likely never be allowed to step foot in heaven again, this is the closest he's going to get. As he's standing on the sun, he looks down at earth and sees an angel sitting on top of a hill. He recognizes this angel on the hill as Uriel, one of heaven's guards. He assumes that if God's creation of man is on earth, then Uriel must be guarding it. So in order to approach Uriel, Satan disguises himself as a cherub. And I'm sorry, this isn't one of the crazy six-winged cherubs. We'll see some of those later. This is described as an infant cherub, so it's more in line with like the Renaissance art that was popular at the time. So you can think that Satan transformed into a little innocent baby angel. So Satan, as a cherub, approaches Uriel and says that he wants to go into God's creation so that he can better understand God and give him praises and nothing devious. And this works because, as the story notes, the angels have never known any kind of contempt or guile or deceit outside of what Satan did. So the concept of Satan appearing as another angel never even crossed their mind. So Uriel just lets the cherub on through.
Distance means so little, but a gift says so much. Etsy has it.
As Satan begins to fly into what is now the Garden of Eden, he is overcome with the beauty of it. As he's flying, he begins to become emotional and feel that he messed everything up. He begins to think if his rebellion was ever even worth it. While thinking of God, he says that his good upbraided none, nor was his service hard. Essentially, why did I ever even need to do that in the first place? If it wasn't for that action, I could be like Uriel and be a part of this beauty. As a matter of fact, Satan feels so much sorrow in this moment that he feels unworthy and guilty to be in Eden in the first place. And perhaps most tragic of all, Satan assumed that the misery and despondence he was feeling was because he was in hell earlier in the story. But now here, surrounded by all this beauty, misery hasn't gone away. He says, "Which way I fly is hell, myself is hell." Until his rebellion, he had never known grief or sorrow or shame or anything of the like. So here, over Eden, Satan asks himself, should I ask for forgiveness? Keep in mind, this story was written in the 1600s. The devil was more so the concept or the embodiment of evil itself. And for Milton to do this, very well could have got him executed. But I believe understanding the condition, or at least trying to understand the condition of one's enemy, is far more useful than just writing them off as an exception. So as he is considering, does he want forgiveness, he stops himself and says, no, that's not what I want. He says, as he was leading the rebellion in heaven, and as he was sitting on the throne in hell, he for the first time had a taste of absolute power and absolute control. And after that, he could never go back to heaven and continue to serve at God's side or act as a happy person whenever all he really wants is to just take power again. He continues to echo that motive, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. And in this moment, he decides that it is worth it. Everything he's done is for a purpose. Satan had also been asking himself the question of why God just hadn't forgiven him as soon as it was over. He'd seen the forgiveness of God time and time again, and wondered why he himself was the exception. But here in this moment, once he realizes that those feelings never really went away, and he's more so just overcome with the beauty around him rather than actually being sorry, that as he now recognizes that he's never changed and he's never going to change, God knew all along. And despite his temporary doubts, Satan never wanted forgiveness, and God always knew that. So, as Satan's having this inner conflict, his eyes are welled up with tears, he's furious and mad. Uriel, who's watching all of this, goes, man, that cherub is going through it. Because again, Satan's still in the form of a cherub, and all of these expressions are, very visible. And it's during that moment, because a divine cherub that doesn't know grief or pain would never make half of the expressions that guy made, Uriel figures this must have been a trick. More specifically, it must be one of the fallen angels, because, there's not many contenders for evil shape-shifting cherubs. So Uriel, who's too far from Satan to catch up, decides to Satan then comes to these beautiful trees in the center of paradise. He transforms himself into the visage of a bird and flies on top of the tallest tree in the garden, the tree of life. Immediately next to this tree of life is the tree of knowledge. As Satan sits on top of the tree, he sees this infinite peace within him, a peace that he's overcome with, realizing he'll never experience it again. And as Satan is up here surveying creation, he sees two creatures coming by. He immediately recognizes them as being special because they're both made in the image of God. These two creatures are, of course, Adam and Eve. The story describes the two as being happy and naked in glory, since they do not know sin and do not know concepts of shame, guilt, lust, or anything of the sort. The two of them are just fully naked all the time. But of course, it doesn't matter because sin isn't even a concept yet, at least not to them. Satan walks as the two walk by a fountain next to the tree of knowledge. As the two are just sitting by the fountain eating fruit, there are lions laden with lambs, and all of these mix of predators and prey in perfect harmony. Concepts of death and misery had not entered the world yet, so everything lived in mutual love. As Satan is listening, he hears the conversation between the two. They're discussing the tree of knowledge next to them. Whenever Adam and later Eve were made in the garden, they were told to not eat of the tree of knowledge, lest they should surely die. I'll talk about at the end why the tree was there and all that, but for now they're just not supposed to eat of it. As they're sitting there, they're talking about it, and Eve says, "What do you think die means?" And Adam says, "I don't know, but it's probably bad. It's probably something that we don't want to happen. Anyway, doesn't this fruit taste amazing?" As the two continue to talk, they talk about the glory of each other's traits and how madly in love they are. It says that whenever Adam looks at Eve, he smiles on her with a superior love. Eve begins to talk about her creation. And I understand this is expository, but it's also cool, so I'll allow it. For those that don't know, in the creation story, Adam was initially created by himself, but God saw that it was not right for someone to exist alone and that humanity needed a partner. So Adam fell asleep and God took out one of Adam's ribs and from that made Eve. So Eve says here in the story that whenever she woke up, it was late at night and she was completely alone. She had no concept of what she was or, existence itself. So she began to wonder and looked down in the river and saw a reflection of herself, and a voice told her that that was her. The voice then told her to go find Adam, and whenever the two met, it says that they were joined in glory, having completed their own creation, and that when Adam first saw her, he fell in love with her, seeing the full power of God's divinity. I also like a lot of the language that's used to describe the story. Like, not just her beauty, which Adam describes as being immeasurable, but there's also a respect and reverence for her position as the mother of all creation. That isn't only brought up a lot by Adam, but as we've seen it, even the angels honor. In this conversation, Adam refers to her as the divine mother, full of beauty. And there's a few moments in this story that get me, and one of them is right here. As Satan is hearing all of this, he's again overcome with emotion, because looking on them as these pure beings that are so beautiful and full of love for each other, he is full of misery that he can't love them. And not that he wishes they had their power or had their position. He wants to be one of the angels who protects them, who has charge to be around them. Just the idea of being around two such pure beings of love and attraction to one another makes him envious. But he snaps out of it again and tells himself that he's too far gone, and if he can't experience the love of these two, then no one can. So he thinks about what the two were talking about, that they're not allowed to eat of the tree of knowledge, and he decides that's how he's going to get them. We then cut back to Uriel, who is going to get help because, if you'll remember, he realized he was tricked. Gabriel is setting atop Eden's gate along with several other angels whenever Uriel gets there. When Gabriel hears this, him and the other angels launch a search. We then go back and see Adam and Eve preparing to go to sleep in this place that's described as a sort of house, but it's made of soft leaves, and it's a beautiful thicket where the two of them retire and sleep every night. Adam mentions that they have work to do tomorrow, such as two angels are like, we better go check up on Adam and Eve, make sure they're okay. And whenever the angels get there, so Adam and Eve are asleep, and Satan is transformed into a frog, and he's sitting next to Eve's ear, just whispering to her in her sleep. So the angels get there, and it says earlier that in this divine bed they have, that no animals enter in, like it's just for them. So whenever the angels like get there, and I imagine they like push the leaves inside, and there's a frog in there that's talking to Eve. One of the angels, it says they hit him with the spear, and he transforms back into Satan. So the two angels take Satan out so they don't bother Adam and Eve's beauty sleep. And the angels ask this fallen angel who he is. Satan mocks them, saying, I was the one who led the armies against you and waged the war in heaven. You two are just stupid if you don't recognize me. And the two angels say that the reason they didn't recognize him is because the hate and turmoil have taken so much away from his heavenly power that he's unrecognizable from the angel they knew. Satan's a little taken aback by this and quickly swallows the worry before Satan goes to see Gabriel. Gabriel immediately recognizes Satan and is not happy to see him. He asks Satan what he's doing here among God's new creation. Satan initially feigns ignorance. He just says, oh, well, hell was lame. It like hurt, and it was hot, and I didn't want to be there anymore, so I just kind of, walking around and found my way here. What a coincidence. So Gabriel calls him out on this and says, oh, so you're the only one who left? All those millions of angels trapped in hell with this fire. You're the only one who had to leave? I guess you're just pretty weak then. And with that, Satan just snaps. As soon as his pride's hurt, he can't take it. And he rebuttals Gabriel by saying how disgraceful it is to look at one who was actually willing to take up for freedom and actually willing to fight for what he believed in, and essentially calls Gabriel just a loser who follows orders. Gabriel responds by saying that Satan was one of the chief looked upon angels in all of heaven, and that everything was in perfect order, everyone was happy, it was perfect joy until he came along. And because of his personal arrogance, he had to ruin it, not just for himself and the angels who fell with him, but for all of creation that would come afterwards. And he says that Satan, who was too weak to swallow his own pride, is nothing but pathetic. With this, Satan begins to threaten war, and he becomes a giant creature, more in line with his true form. As soon as he does this, Gabriel and the angels around him also begin to grow in scale. The story describes it as powering up for a battle that could destroy this new creation entirely. Just as they're about to fight, God causes these giant scales to appear in the sky. And I mean like physical scales, like you put weight at one side and it goes down while the other goes up. One of these scales is very far down and the other one's very far up. And Gabriel grabs Satan, essentially telling him to knock it off, and shows him the scales, which are indicating the difference between the power of God, i.e. Gabriel, and the power of Satan and his personal pride, which is literally nothing, because all of his power is just a amalgamation that he kept from God, which is nothing compared to Gabriel's direct God power. So I cannot stress this enough. Satan was about to destroy the entirety of creation, and Gabriel literally power scaled him. Satan is about to fight, and Gabriel grabs him, and he's like, look at the charts. Do you see that chart? I would body you in an instant. So with that, Satan travels to the dark side of the earth before the sun rises in Eden, and Gabriel and the angels return to their post.
What's for dinner? Panera, freshly prepared with clean ingredients. It's not just a night off from cooking, it's a delicious night on for everyone at the table. Panera. Only $1 delivery fee on our app.
So the next morning, when Adam and Eve wake up, Eve says,
oh my god.
And I can only imagine that Adam was like, bad, what an interesting
Fuck that.
In the dream, Eve says a voice that she thought was Adam's guided her to the tree of knowledge. When she got to the tree, an angel appeared and took a bite out of one of the fruits and then offered the same to eat. She said it was hard to explain, but she felt that eating of the fruit would make her be like God. So as soon as she took a bite of it in the dream, her and the angelic figure flew up into the clouds before the angelic figure disappeared, and she slowly drifted down to earth before waking up. I didn't expect dream symbolism of the fall of man depicted in a story from the 17th century, but I'm definitely here for it. As she's relaying this story to Adam, Eve begins to cry, which is, again, probably a new emotion for them. Adam comforts her, telling her that it's okay, and that just because something happened in a dream doesn't mean it's real. At the same time, God in heaven, who's seen all of this, says that Adam and Eve need to be made aware of the devil's tricks. So God calls on one of his chief angels, Raphael, to go to earth and warn Adam and Eve. However, God stresses that this doesn't mean you imprison them, and it doesn't mean you hunt down Satan and capture him. This is just to inform them of the tricks that Satan is going to try to pull. Because above all else, they must maintain the freedom to do whatever they desire. So Raphael comes to earth in this seraph-like embodiment of a six-winged angel, and Adam and Eve can see the bright light of Raphael glowing before he even gets close. So as they see him walking their way, they begin to prepare a feast of fruits and drink and what have you. Whenever Raphael steps into their home, or essentially like the little burrow alcove that they have, again we see more symbolism of Raphael respecting Eve's position. As soon as Raphael, one of God's chief angels, walks into the burrow, he bows himself before Eve and says, "Hail, mother of mankind, whose fruitful womb shall fill the world." So, as they eat, Adam and Eve begin to ask Raphael questions. Initially, they ask questions like, "Oh, can angels eat human food? What's it like to fly?" Basic stuff you'd imagine a human would ask an angel. Eventually, Adam asks a question about the position of humanity and why they are specifically given dominion over the garden on earth. Raphael explains that there is a hierarchy of order and that everything that is a tier up maintains the traits of the tier below it. You have plants and fruits that have a physical form, and then you have animals that have a physical form and some level of sentience, and then you have humans that have physical form, sentience, and soul. And Raphael explains that this continues to rise into heaven. After that, you have angels who have all three of those, as well as heavenly power. And then past that, you have God, who has all of that, as well as omnipotence, inside, outside of time, and other godly abilities. Adam says that this makes sense and asks why anyone would want to overthrow this authority. See, Adam is asking questions about this, like why would someone not just go about the way they're supposed to? Because in his mind and in his heart, the concept of guile or envy or pride doesn't even exist. So for him, it's a conundrum as to why this order would even be upset in the first place. Raphael explains that all higher order beings have the power of free will, and that free will can lead people to commit actions of good or evil that ultimately make them happy. And just because someone is fulfilled by something doesn't mean it's the right thing. As an example, Raphael mentions the fallen angels, because as we understand, just because Satan wanted to overthrow God doesn't mean that he should, do that. Adam asked Raphael if he can explain the history of why the angels fell, and Raphael agrees. So we finally get the story of why Satan rebelled and of the war in heaven. Raphael said that before the earth was created, God in heaven gathered all the angels together for a great announcement. His announcement was that there is now a new creation, an extension of himself directly, and that this creation was God's Son, or at least a son in the closest way humans could consider it. Again, most people believe the Son always existed, but we're sticking to the poem. Furthermore, God said that this Son has all of the powers and is an extension of God himself and should be treated as such, and that one day this Son would create a realm of paradise for new creatures to enjoy. At the announcement of this, all of heaven was joyous and blew trumpets and had celebrations and welcomed the Son of God now brought before them. All but one, God's chief angel, the name of Lucifer. Lucifer was furious. His entire existence, he had never considered the idea of moving up or someone being put in rank above him. But now that God extended himself through his Son, Lucifer was jealous that that couldn't be him. Lucifer begins to contemplate what he can do to overthrow this new authority insert himself at the right hand of God. It's during this time that sin is created as described earlier and eventually death. Lucifer decides that he won't be able to insert himself by God's side peacefully, so he'll take it by force. That night he goes to Beelzebub, again his second command, and tells Beelzebub to round up all the angels as they're going to fly to the north end of heaven, where waiting for them will be this new Son of God to give them future orders. So millions of angels join behind Lucifer. Again, he was the chief, if not one of the chief angels, and Lucifer goes to the north end of heaven with a third of the angels following him. Now during this time, Lucifer thinks that he's being sneaky, or he's going to trick God. But as we understand, God sees all, and he sees this happening in the current moment. He knows exactly what's going to come of this, but he allows free will to carry itself out. So as soon as they get to the north end of heaven, Lucifer constructs a throne out of diamond and gold. He asks all the angels around them, have they ever considered what could happen if they tried to reign themselves? He asks the angels to consider their own power and think about what could happen if all of them united. They could essentially accomplish anything. But above all else, think of all they could create and control if they had the throne of God. And again, while not exactly subtle, it is certainly effective. The visual of Lucifer telling everyone that they need to unite together because they can all share their power and be in unison with each other as he sits on a diamond throne. Again, everything that Satan is doing is to motivate his own selfish actions. He's jealous that he's in his position at the right hand of God. Because of that, he's willing to say or do whatever it takes to get his revenge, as long as at the end of the day, he's sitting on his throne as he does it. Most of the angels are on board with this and think it would be cool to have the power of God. One angel speaks up against Lucifer, an angel by the name of Abdiel. Abdiel essentially says, what are you on about? Because he makes the valid argument that the reason any of us have any power right now is a direct line from God. So if you go severing that line, you probably won't get far. Furthermore, he points out the fact that concepts of pain and misery and, dying are literally just concepts. They don't exist yet. So Abdiel, sensing that there's some underlying motive for Lucifer's sudden change of heart and want of revolution, asks Lucifer why he would go against a perfect being that created him. Lucifer cannot answer this question, so he diverts. He asks Abdiel, so do you remember being created? And according to the story, God just snapped and the angels were created. So there was no creation process or first consciousness, they simply just were. So Lucifer says, I don't remember being created. Do you remember when you were created? What about you? And no one can remember when they were created. So Lucifer says, what if we're all self-made? What if we all have our own power? And what if that guy over there on the throne is no different from the rest of us? But just because he has that big seat, we all think he should be in charge. Again, Satan is saying this while sitting in a big seat thinking he should be in charge. Lucifer says that this incredible power each of them have is within them and their own creation. So why not use that power to take the throne? With this, all the angels begin to cheer and ridicule Abdiel as Abdiel gets up and flies to God's throne. Something that's interesting about this story is with the characterization of Satan, his spoken motive is constantly changing. His true motive has always been the same. In the beginning, he was jealous of Jesus and wanted to fight God, and in the garden, he still wants to fight God. But he continues to change his spoken motive into whatever can best manipulate the people around him. At first, it's, hey, why don't we all join together with our angelic power and take a position that's rightfully ours, and ignore this whole golden seed, it's just for show. And then right after that, his spoken motive changes into, well, actually, God's not special, and we're all just like God, and that guy's a poser, so we should get rid of him. And then in the beginning of the story, when we saw the angels in hell, Satan says, oh, well, we're just not, going to let this go unanswered. We have to get our revenge. And furthermore, hey, so maybe I was wrong about the whole God not being powerful thing, because as Beelzebub said in the beginning, God got hands. So let's attack God where it really hurts, which is this new realm of creation. And now in the story's current position in the garden, he's just like, well, I guess I'll ruin this whole man thing he's got going on. This shell of righteousness that covers up his bitterness and hate is now, at the current place in the story, it's mankind. This is also reflected in Satan's transformations throughout the story. Whenever he's first described, he's as tall as a mountain in this natural form, but then he transforms and shrinks down so he can fit into Pandemonium. But then after that, he transforms into a small little cherub, much less powerful than the form he was just at, and then he becomes the bird, and then he becomes the frog, and then finally he'll become a serpent. The iconography of these transformations continues to scale down until he's boiled down to what he really is, a deceitful creature that crawls about on its belly. The visage of his verbal stance grows in hand with the visage of his physical stance. Another interesting detail about the scene in heaven when Abdael flies off is that Satan is using the same manipulation tactics. For those that know where the story of Eden ends up, for one, it's not the best, but in the Bible it says that the way the serpent tricks Eve into eating the fruit is by saying that the tree of knowledge is simply that, the source of knowledge, and if Eve eats of it, she'll be like God. For one, that's the same temptation that led Satan to commit his own atrocity, but two, it's a gap in Eve's understanding as she
Alright, whatever.
be, and that's where Satan finds his end through the mystery in order to get her to sin. Much like here, whenever he asks the angels to remember being created, he uses that to fill in the gaps and pose themselves as equal creatures to God. Through ignorance, Satan can manipulate his subjects' understanding. Furthermore, the idea that Satan tricks people or gets them to sin by convincing them that they are more powerful than they really are, or convincing them that the only thing they need to succeed is their self, is something that is seen throughout the entirety of the Bible. So it's interesting to imagine that his first manipulation was in the same manner, of causing people to look inward rather than outward. So that was a lot of weird analysis, I know, but I can't help myself.
Hi, Jimmy Page here with Bitrix 24, a free CRM that will help you achieve explosive growth. You'll wipe out all the competition, just like that. Need to segment your clients? Not a problem. Sales automation? No sweat. Just set a process in motion and the system handles the rest. Bitrix 24 does it all. Rock solid CRM, marketing, client service, team collaborations, and integrations. And Bitrix 24 is absolutely free. So what are you waiting for? Get it now at Bitrix24.com.
Abdael flies to God's throne, and when he gets there, he sees that God is already preparing. Because he knows God can see all, he doesn't need Abdael to tell him that, but it's cool that he still did. God praises Abdael for resisting the temptation and flying back to his side, and in the meantime, the chief leader of the army of angels, Michael, along with his second-in-command, Gabriel, are gathering their armies to fight the armies of Lucifer. As Lucifer is beginning to march his way to the throne of God, Michael and his armies fly north to meet them. Whenever the two sides meet in the middle of this grand field, Lucifer comes to the front of his line in a giant golden chariot. Again, definitely just for show. We're all equal, guys, don't worry. Abdael, who sees Lucifer in this chariot, becomes furious. Abdael steps to the front of the army and accuses Lucifer of just being a blatant copycat. He says, look at you here in a golden chariot with an army made up of heaven's angels. You don't know how to create or make anything for yourself. You can only mimic what came before you. Lucifer begins to rebuttal something to the effect of, well, maybe I can make it better. And Abdael throws the first strike of the battle with holy power and blows Lucifer like 100 feet back. With that, the fight begins. And it's not really mentioned that they're using stuff like swords. Instead, they're just using their heavenly abilities. The story describes it as being all elements that can ever be imagined, being hurled back and forth at each other with earthquakes and thunder. As they fight, the angels continue to assume their true form as these massive mountains of creatures that are attacking each other with raw energy. Now, nothing can die. As mentioned earlier, angels can only die through God's annihilation. So instead, the battle is described as tiring each other out to the point to where one is pinned and can't move or worn out and can't move. Essentially just a fight to subdue each other. There's also the mention that during the fight, God, who's watching all of this, lessens their their true form and do battle, it's described as two planets colliding in a fight, quote, fit to decide the empires of heaven. During this battle, Michael pulls out a sword that was made by God directly. So Michael draws his sword and strikes at Lucifer, cutting his right side completely. As soon as this happened, Lucifer exclaims in agony, as this is the first time pain has ever been felt. From there, Michael continues to just start shredding angels. Moloch is mentioned as having been completely cut in half. But again, these angels can't die, so they just lay there in their disrepair and pain, essentially hoping that they were taught a lesson. The angels bring their fallen leaders back to a cave in the north side of heaven, and while there, everyone begins to heal, because, they heal pretty quickly. While discussing what to do, Lucifer says that they should keep fighting, but they should change their game plan a bit. Nisroch, one of the leaders, says that perhaps they can build better weapons. So Lucifer and the army begins to dig underground, and they come across these chaos materials. Using these materials, they build a form of gunpowder. Now this seems like a weird note, why would angels have gunpowder? But this actually comes from a mention in a non-canonical book of the Bible known as the Book of Enoch, where it says that the fallen angels who came to earth taught man things like witchcraft, sorcery, and weapon making. Among that weapon making were things like black powder. So again, while that belief is not followed in like 99% of Christianity, in this whole what-if scenario, Milton's saying that if that were true, perhaps they learned it in heaven. So using this gunpowder, they construct what I can only describe as cannons. It says they were these long stone shapes that whenever the materials were lit, caused a great war and something to be thrown. So, cannons. So the next day, Lucifer and his armies continue to march back towards heaven with these cannons up front. The responding military of heaven sees these cannons and are like, that's weird, before, they start getting shot at. And it seems the plan worked because these cannons hurt a lot. Lucifer and Belial begin to mock all the angels they hit. And while they're mocking them, Michael and a few of the more powerful angels take on their true form and literally throw mountains at the cannons, burying them completely. So as the battle continues, the Son of God, who's been watching all of this, decides that enough is enough. The Son of God comes out in a sort of chariot and rides into the field. As soon as Michael sees that the Son of God is coming, he immediately orders all of his men off the battlefield, as the Son of God rides off against Lucifer alone. It then says that any of Lucifer's angels who tries to approach the sun are immediately pushed back with a hand wave and 1,000 bolts of thunder. The sun, completely unfazed, continues to push forward and pushes Lucifer and the millions of angels up against the border of heaven. Lucifer, seeing the Son of God get closer to him with all of his power, rather than facing him, willingly jumps out of heaven. And all of the angels jump with him, eventually falling into the pits of hell. What an interesting change in the story. The idea that Satan was not cast out of heaven, but in fear jumped. Either way, this actually led to the fall of the angels and the destruction of earth as we know it. But there's something about him fleeing from the being that he was most jealous of and thought he could stand up against, and I just really like. And from there, they fall for 9 days and wind up in hell, and we know where the story goes from there. Raphael then concludes this tale, because remember, he's been telling it to Adam all the time, that this very same Satan is here in the garden now, and that him and Eve need to be ready. Adam continues to ask questions regarding creation, specifically the creation of humanity. And whenever Adam asks the question, he says, as long as that's okay, I don't want to ask any knowledge I'm not supposed to know. And Raphael says, of course, it's totally fine to ask. And then clarifies the reason that you're not supposed to eat of the tree of knowledge is because it is knowledge that you do not want to know of. It's suffering and hate. Again, humanity has never known these things up until this point, so the knowledge of them would be bad. Raphael clarifies that wanting to know about your creation is totally fine. An entire section of Paradise Lost is dedicated to Raphael's response. And I won't go through it here because it's not pertinent to the story, but essentially Raphael gives Adam the whole rundown of the 7 days of creation. He talks about how God created the world out of the chaos that encircled the abyss. He said that God looked on creation and it was all beautiful, but it had no name or purpose. So God created man. Man named the animals. He then saw wants to know about the stars and how stars work. At this point, Eve says something really sweet. She says that she hasn't done any of her work in the garden that day because she's been too busy listening to Raphael's story. So at Adam's question about the stars, she tells Adam that he can tell her the story later because she values the words of her love even above that of angels. Aw, that'll come back to be not a good thing in a little bit, but I'm savoring it for now. So that convo goes on for a bit. Raphael says if he told Adam everything, it would melt his brain, blah, blah, blah. And then Adam describes his first moments of consciousness to Raphael. These are the broad strokes that we already know. Adam woke up under the sunlight, and he began to name the animals, but then he felt lonely. But what's interesting about this section is how he describes Eve. It says that whenever Adam came to from his deep sleep after God used his rib to make Eve, that when he saw her, she was, quote, adorned with what all earth or heaven could bestow to make her amiable. Grace was in all her steps, heaven in her eye, in every gesture, dignity and love. And the moment he saw her, he felt for the first time wholly complete. While speaking of Eve, he says that she is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, spirit of my spirit. And while talking about Eve, Adam says that he is so madly fascinated and in love with her that it almost worries him. He says that if she were to ever lead him astray, his free will or desire were to cause her to go wrong, then Adam couldn't help himself, because all that he knows of will and desire is in her. Raphael says maybe don't do that. While they're made to love each other, and it's definitely seen as a good thing, that love isn't a justification to do wrong. Again, foreshadowing. There's also several moments of intimacy between Adam and Eve throughout the story, and Adam begins to just start describing it to Raphael, and then ask, so do angels do anything like that? And Raphael is described as visibly blushing. And Raphael says that angels express love, but they're more divine beings and don't need to be physical to do it. And then at that awkward question, Raphael's like, well, look at the time, I gotta go. Before Raphael leaves, he tells Adam to remember that while free will is good and love is good, it should not justify evil. God and divinity is your compass, so free will and love follow you closer to that compass, then that's great. But if it leads you astray, steer clear of it. With that, Raphael leaves, and Adam goes to find Eve. Paradise Lost is separated into 12 books, at least in Milton's second edition, which is what I used. And at the beginning of book 9, there's this long section where Milton essentially apologizes to the reader, saying that while he wishes he could stay in paradise forever, much like humanity, he must now tell of the fall. We then come back to Satan, who, if you'll remember, was ran out of the garden the last time we saw him. It says he's been hiding on the dark side of the earth for 7 days, and on the 8th day, decides to try his luck in paradise again. It says he slips by the angels and slips his way to paradise by disguising himself as a mist. Again, God is privy to all of this, but humanity is responsible for their own actions, as Satan is responsible for his. Satan has a moment here as he's thinking about the final peaceful moments of Eden, and he looks around at this grand openness and how Adam and Eve have dominion over the earth, and he realizes that Eden is what he always wanted. He wants power, he wants authority over others. And even though he was the highest angel in God's rank, that still wasn't good enough. So he looks at Adam and Eve and the dominion that they have over the planet and says that if I can't have it, they can't either. He considers what animal to become and eventually decides on the form of a serpent. He believes that he can use the subtlety and beauty of the serpent in order to get what he wants. He's now fully invested in the idea of destroying what God did and making it a part of hell's conquest. So the archangel has now taken on the form of a serpent. And at the same time of this bitter nature that rises up in him, the figure who once commanded legions, saying that they need to defeat God because it's what true justice is now saying that he'll simply destroy paradise because he's not allowed to have it. The degeneracy of character, just as his form degenerated from an archangel to that of a snake. So the next day, Adam and Eve are about to go out to the garden, and Adam suggests that they should stay with each other because of the whole, Raphael Satan story. But Eve disagrees with this, saying that they should split up so they can get more work done. Eve says, well, we can't be hurt or die, so what can this Satan God do to us? Furthermore, she says it would be honorable if Adam or Eve were to defeat Satan or resist As he approaches her, disguised as a serpent, he positions his body upright. As the serpent approaches her, he begins to speak and praise the glory of the Queen of Humanity. Eve is taken aback by this and says that, to her knowledge, her and Adam were the only two who could talk. And with that, the flattery now moves into trickery. The serpent says that he was just a normal snake, crawling around on the ground until he came across a beautiful smelling fruit. When he ate of the fruit, he was immediately given knowledge of the universe. He says now with this newfound knowledge, he was immediately drawn to Eve, as her form is so perfect and her beauty so divine that he is compelled to worship her. Eve relents a little bit and says that she's not worthy of that much worship, but where's this fruit you're talking about? Satan is wearing at her with the same pride that once tempted him, and still continues to. So the serpent begins to lead Eve to this special fruit. And sure enough, as you probably imagined, the fruit is of the tree of knowledge. The tree that, if they are to eat of it, they should surely die. Whenever they get there, Eve sighs and says, oh, this is the tree that I'm not supposed to eat of. The serpent, puzzled, asks, why are you not supposed to eat of this? And Eve says, well, God told Adam and I that if we ever eat of it, we should surely die. The serpent laughs and says, oh, Queen of the universe, you won't die. I mean, I'm just a snake, right? And I ate it, and I'm okay. As a matter of fact, I'm better than I'm. I have knowledge, I can speak, I can think of divinity. So if I'm just a snake, and I got all of those powers, what will happen to you? He begins to tempt her, saying that you can be as powerful as God. And as a matter of fact, I bet that's why God doesn't want you to have it. God just doesn't want you to have the powers that he does. And even if you don't get those powers, you'll definitely become something special. As a matter of fact, I bet it's a test. I bet this is a test to see if you can stand up against the will of God to deserve to fall by his side. And besides, even forgetting all of that, is God really going to end his creation for just eating? What kind of God would that be? Well, it's easy for us to look at this and think that Eve's being dumb. You have to realize this is a person who has never encountered any form of deception or guile. She is innocence in its purest form, and all it takes is a little suggestion for the will to turn away from what is right and what is just into selfish desire. So then, desiring knowledge and desiring to be like God, we know where this story goes, and Eve eats the fruit. The story says that the second she bites the fruit, quote, earth felt the wound, and nature from her seed, sighing through all her words, gave sign of woe. The goodwill and cooperation of all of earth was broken by the jealous and hateful nature of a fallen serpent. So, seeing that his work is done, the serpent slithers away as Eve continues to eat the fruit. After a minute, she sits there and thinks about the concept of death and how she's now willingly invited it in. She then thinks of Adam and what will happen to him. If Adam eats of the fruit, will he ascend to the same godhood that Eve is trying to achieve? And if she's to die from this, does that mean Adam will continue to live forever? Will God make him another Eve? And she says, if I die from this knowledge, I couldn't stand for him to have another Eve. We will share all, even death. With that, Eve bows to the tree of knowledge and then runs to find Adam. Slack hand, the garland wreath for Eve now dropped. death has already began to enter the world. And that picture of the last act of unadulterated love being dropped as a fading rose. Man. And then to her, Adam says this, O fairest of creation, last and best of all God's works, creature in whom excelled whatever can to sight or thought be formed, holy, divine, good, amiable, or sweet. How art thou lost? How on a sudden lost, defaced, deflowered, and now to death devote? Brother, how hast thou yielded to transgress the strict forbiddance? How to violate the sacred fruit forbidden? Some cursed fraud of enemy hath beguiled thee, yet unknown, and me, with thee, hath ruined. For with thee certain my resolution is to die. How can I live without thee? How forgo thy sweet converse and love so dearly joined, to live again in these wild woods forlorn? Should God create another Eve, die another rib afford? Yet loss of thee would never from my heart. No, no, I feel Satan's nature draw me. Flesh of flesh, bone of my bone thou art. From thy state, mine never shall be parted. Bliss, woe. Such a, it is the tragedy, right? This is the tragedy of humanity. Everything that comes afterwards comes from this. And a lot of people are quick on this story, not just like Paradise Lost, but the biblical account, to snap at Eve, to be like, wow, what a foolish person to just fall for it like that, right? But that's not where the tragedy lies. It's not the idea of, wow, if only Eve would have thought a little harder. It's the fact that these were two people who loved each other and experienced perfection in a way that we never will this side of eternity. Just unfiltered bliss. And something came in between them, and after that happened, it's this slow erosion of perfection. And that's what the tragedy is. That's what's heartbreaking about it. See, in a perfect world, the sacrifice would never need to take place, and Adam and Eve could just love each other wholly, completely, unfiltered. But now that the sin of man has crept in, it's perverted that perfection. It's good that Adam loves Eve as much as he does, and it says that God saw that it was good that they complete each other so much. But now, despite Eve turning from what's correct, Adam still has that full love, and he's still fully dedicated to it. See, if this were any other story, this would be seen as admirable. This would be a beautiful part where a character sacrifices himself for the love of his life. But here it's so agonizing because the consequences cannot be worth it. But to Adam in that moment, that's all he cares about. He doesn't care about becoming a god. He doesn't care about tasting of knowledge. He just cares about Eve. And as he said, he's resolved to die for it. And that's what makes it so sad, right? Because it was just this perfect picture, and envy broke into in the form of the serpent. And from there, everything fell apart. Whenever Adam begins to speak directly to Eve, the first phrase he says is, "Bold deed thou hast presumed, adventurous Eve," almost in a playful nature, knowing that he's already decided what he's going to do. And with that, Adam steps forward and eats of the fruit. And it says that the earth trembled from her entrails at the completing of mortal sin. So now both of them are not just divine creatures of love, they're beings of temper, of guile, of worry, fear, lust. Specifically, according to Milton's story here, the first emotion that the two feel is lust. As mentioned earlier, there's several times throughout the story where the two are intimate, but it's always framed as this beautiful act that is purely romantic and has no feeling of temperament or of need or of conquest in any form. It's seen as wholly beautiful until this moment. It says that Adam looks at Eve for the first time with lust throughout his being. And then from that, another moment of intimacy happens, but it's described as much harsher compared to what we see before. It's done in a dark, hidden corner, and he's much more violent than previously stated. It's the first physical corruption of love, because Adam thought he was doing the right thing, and even not the right thing, he thought he was doing what was right for him by sacrificing himself to Eve because he wanted to maintain that love. But as we see from that scene, the love itself isn't there anymore. It's already been decayed ever since Eve made her first decision. And part of the tragedy of the fall is that Adam sacrificed himself to chase a ghost. So after that, the two fall asleep, and when they wake up, they're immediately afraid. They wake up with fear of turmoil, of everything that could possibly go wrong. See, God never lied to them. It was a tree of knowledge, and as Raphael said, it's a tree of knowledge that you don't want any part of. But now that they've eaten of it, they're full of chaos, of fear, of guilt, and of shame. So you remember throughout the story, they've been naked this entire time because shame and concepts of that don't even exist. But now, for the first time, they recognize themselves naked. So they go and gather fig leaves and begin to weave them together so that they can cover themselves. They are no longer humans of divinity, but instead these corrupted beings and humanity fallen. Adam is terrified and sad as he knows that he can never look on divine beings like God or angels again without feeling shame and fear. Immediately, as soon as Adam begins to say this, he starts to yell at Eve. There's never been anything close to an argument. When I mentioned they kind of get into it before they separate, by get into it, I mean, well, maybe we should do this. Maybe we should do this. You're right, sweetie, and that's as far as the argument goes. But here, Adam is hateful. He blames her for everything, says it's her fault for falling to the serpent, saying that they never should have left each other in the first place. And Eve bites back, saying that if it wasn't me the serpent got to, then it probably would have got to you next. Adam then says that Eve is ungrateful, because he sacrificed himself and took on death to be with her, and now she's blaming him for it. And then the two just continue to bicker, as the section ends by saying, thus they, in mutual accusation, spent the fruitless hours, but neither, self-condemning, and of their vain contest, appeared no end. The tragedy of it, like the sorrow, is that the sacrifice of Adam meant nothing. He was like, oh, this love has been lost, so surely if I follow you to death, the love will be there. But it's not that pure, uncontented love that he had before. He's not following her, he's falling to her level. And now they're just both equally hateful. And the story paints the idea that wronged actions, even if done for the right or just reasons, are ultimately fruitless. Back in heaven, the angels are asking how Satan managed to step in. And God in heaven says that he allowed Satan to come in because humanity had the option of what it wanted to follow. See, it's a question throughout a lot of Christian and just, theology in general, of why the tree of knowledge was in the garden in the first place. As established, the purpose of humanity, as mentioned in most biblical ideas, and especially in Paradise Lost, is to have a perfect world for these beings of free will who can do whatever they want. But love and freedom are meaningless if there's not choice. At any point, Adam and Eve could leave the garden, they could separate themselves from God, they could give themselves to their own actions, and take on the chaos and turmoil of the universe around them. All they had to do was choose a way out, and the tree of knowledge was that way out. Without the tree of knowledge, free will doesn't exist. With that, the Son of God, which is again an extension of God, steps down to earth. The Son, referred to for the rest of the story as God, walks through the garden calling for Adam and Eve. Initially, the two are hiding from God, not wanting to face the consequences. Finally, after God yells for long enough, Adam and Eve step out. God asks why they hid, and Adam said that he was embarrassed because he felt naked. Again, a symptom of sin itself. So, God looks at Adam and says, did you eat the fruit? And Adam says what he should absolutely not say. He says, well, I only ate the fruit because Eve ate it first, and Eve brought the fruit to me. So, since you, God, gave me Eve, I figured that she wasn't capable of doing wrong. Because why would you give me something that would cause me to sin? Which is a horrible answer. That's literally just being like, hey, that whole free will and consequence thing, how's that going? And him being like, well, it's really your fault if you think about it, so you need to clean up your act. God responds to Adam and says, oh, is Eve God now? He then moves to Eve and says, why did you eat of the fruit? Eve says that the serpent tempted her, to which, as seen in the book of Genesis, it says the serpent was cursed to crawl on its belly and to bite the heel of man, and man proves its head. There's a lot of argument and debate over whether this means like physically snakes or like the serpent as in Satan or the visage of Satan, but whatever, the serpent gets cursed. God says that the heel of man will continue to bruise the head of the serpent until, quote, Jesus, the son of Mary, the the second Eve delivers the fatal bruise. Which, what a beautiful way to think about Mary, right? As the second Eve, humanity's second attempt at perfection. So if you know the book of Genesis, you pretty much know what happens next. Their punishment is Eve will have to endure the pains of childbirth, as will the mothers that come after her. Adam is that he can no longer simply just pick up food and eat it. He must work and toil for food, and he will encounter things like thorns and brambles, and it won't be as easy. And of course, death will eventually face them. However, while for Adam and Eve this is a horrifying thought, in actuality, it is a form of deliverance. See, whenever God and the Son of God were having the conversation in heaven in the scene prior, God points out that they are now creatures that have been cursed with sin, and because of that, there will always be selfish desires and hate. So because through an action they gave themselves to sin, God offers them an out. Through another action, they can save themselves from sin. At the time of Adam and Eve, that was through the following of the new law that God would set up for them, and the sacrifice. To represent that sacrifice, sheep are then killed in the garden, first deaths, as sheepskin is draped over their body as actual clothing. To maintain free will and the importance of humanity, as humanity committed an act of selfishness in order to give themselves to the devil, they must commit another act of selfishness, a sacrifice, in order to remove that grief of sin in order to be acceptable to re-enter heaven. In that way, death is not as much a punishment as it is a re-admittance into the family of God. This is something that would be talked a lot throughout the entire Bible, of the idea that death has no staying power or sting. Because if someone believes and follows God, it's a return to what we were always meant to be. In the meantime, while this is happening, remember how sin and death were building a chaos bridge to earn? Well, they've been doing that through the entire story, and at this point they're almost there. As that's also happening, we see that Satan has now made his way back to Pandemonium. He comes there proud to this cheering crowd and says that he now embraces the name of Satan. See, up until this point in the story, while the narrative called him Satan, he did not have a name, because as mentioned in the beginning, the angels that fell from heaven had their names removed. So Satan says that he's taking on the name Satan, as it means adversary. And now, since he's had this victory against God's creation of man, he will forever be the adversary against God.
Hi, this is Bryan Cranston. The official trailer for the Showtime series Your Honor starts in 3, 2, 1. Everything that happened flowed from that one moment, that one decision.
Michael, I am offering you a chance to atone for what you have done, to help eradicate an entire criminal organization for good.
What exactly are you asking me to do? Did you ever tell anyone anything that I should be worried about? Your problem. My problem.
This is intercut with sin and death making their way to earth and immediately beginning to pollute everything. Sin's children, the Cerberus things, which are creatures like greed and discord, go about and cause everything to start fighting each other. The animals begin to fight each other. There begins to be turmoil in the clouds and the weather. Death begins to kill off trees and animals one by one. And sin says that eventually death should kill humanity after she's corrupted them. Again, the consequences of allowing sin and free will of anything to enter into earth. As Satan's giving his speech back in Pandemonium, he says that they have won this war and that now the time to strike at earth and heaven has come. And as soon as he says this, himself as well as all of the other fallen angels in Pandemonium turn into snakes. They all crawl around on the ground as these starving serpents, and it says they're so hungry. And at the same time, trees shoot up around hell that have the fruit from the tree of knowledge. But anytime that the snakes try to eat it, it turns to ash, so they're just miserable. And then after, I guess, a few days of this, they turn back in their normal forms. But it says that every year, that just randomly happens. And while they will continue to spread their influence and tempt man for the generations to come, they're transforming into the form that originally destroyed man, is a constant reminder of their place, and how they will never be powerful enough to outright destroy Earth or God, as it's been foretold that Earth and heaven will one day be joined. But again, humanity has free will and can choose to follow the will of Satan if they wish, but that doesn't mean Satan gets free reign to kill and destroy whatever he wants. And that's the last that we see of Satan in the story. His character ends in this kind of place of limbo, where he must continuously fight and toil against God, knowing that he can never get all the way. So then the story then finishes out on Adam and Eve. Adam looks at the world and the destruction around him and wishes that he were dead. As Adam is crying, Eve begins to try to comfort him, and he immediately snaps back and blames her for all of it. And then there's this really sad scene where Eve breaks down and begins crying and begs for Adam's forgiveness, saying that whatever happens, death or otherwise, please don't leave me. And whenever she says that, Adam relents for a moment and recognizes these new emotions that are coming over him are powerful, and he has to keep them in check. Adam says that where they are at now cannot be undone. So the best course of action they have is to just love each other as much as they can in spite of themselves. Eve then says, "Let us seek death, or he not found, supply with our own hands his office on ourselves." Eve fears that her children will be subject to the same curse that she currently has. So she says, what if we just end it all? Which, in all of my years of philosophizing and considering creation in the biblical story, I never considered that. What would have happened if, after the fall, humanity just stopped right there? Would there have been another similar effect? Would the entire experiment just be ended altogether? While in Eve it seems momentary, to us it would be literally the most monumental event ever that we would never be aware of because we wouldn't exist. Adam warns of this train of thought because he says this is the despair that led Satan to where he is now. And as these creatures who constantly have to battle sin, they cannot give themselves up to despair. Furthermore, he tells Eve to think of the prophecy that God gave them, that one day the Son of God would come, this Jesus, to fatally bruise the serpent's head. So if that's ever to take place, then they have to carry on so that the generations after them can take out Satan forever. He continues and says, perhaps we can live with these punishments, and this time on earth will be a trial, as afterwards we can return to the divinity we once knew. So the two return to the area where they first talked to God and bow on their face and ask for forgiveness. It's then in heaven that the Son of God directly talks to God and makes intercession for man. And it's here at this moment, recognizing humanity's forgiveness, that the Son of God solidifies that one day he will go to earth, he was made as a man, and by humanity's own actions he will be killed. But it will be the final sacrifice. And from that, a direct line will be made from earth to heaven that all can enter in. Because seeing humanity's regret and hope in spite of their despair means that through God they have potential to rejoin him at his side. Now that being said, they are corrupt creatures who will inevitably corrupt and sin more, and because of that, they must leave the garden. But in order to give them faith, and this is one of the primary turns from the biblical account to Milton's account, God tells Michael, the leader of heaven's army, to go and remove them from the garden, but to make sure they have hope as he does. So Michael comes to them and says that they have to leave. It also says that whenever Michael appears, he is fierce and full of glory in his full form, and they can barely look at it. Again, humanity no longer has divinity, so they view these divine creatures as these terrifying monoliths of power, rather than companions they once knew. Eve begins to cry at hearing this, and Adam holds her and says that it will be okay, because she's still his holy mother. There's this concept in some realms of Christianity. It's something known as the fortune fall. And it's the idea that the fall was actually a good thing because it caused people, I don't know why that got me so much, Adam's love for her, even in spite of sin. I guess that's the love we know currently, right? Love in spite of sin. But the fortune fall is this concept that the fall was a good thing because it allows good to rise up in spite of it. Or like all of these great heroes of the Bible would never have existed if they didn't have to stand up against sin. And while I don't agree with that for multiple reasons, primarily I don't think, good people is a worthy trade-off for, death and murder and, not perfection. But that being said, there is a beauty to, after everything, after recognizing sin for the first time, and all of the horrors that are going to befall humanity, and Adam still looks at Eve and calls her the Holy Mother. There's something about Eve throughout the story, how she's mentioned as being like this destination of perfection. Even the angels bow at her respect. It's such a romantic picture of reverence. And then even after she fell, and then Adam fell after her, and still in this lowest state, he looks at her, and she's still the mother. Michael reaffirms this by saying that the most important thing that they have on earth is the unity between themselves, and that whatever happens going forward, God's promise to them is that they were made to complete each other, and that promise will never be broken. Adam begins to break down, realizing that he'll never be able to speak to God again. Michael corrects him and says that he can speak to God anywhere, not just Eden, the first concept of things like prayer and devotion. Michael says that he wants to show Adam something, and he waves his hand over Eve, and she falls into a peaceful sleep. He then takes Adam, and again this is the whole part that's specific to just Milton's account. He takes Adam to a mountaintop, and from this mountaintop he can see an entire hemisphere of the earth. And it's here that Michael gives Adam a run-through of all of humanity. Adam, as the father to mankind, has the privilege or misfortune, depending on how you look at it, of seeing everything that he will begot. Adam remarks at the size of this mountain, and Michael comments that it is very similar to a mountain that one day Jesus, the Son of God, will be led to by Satan, whenever Satan tried to tempt God and show him the kingdoms of the world that he could inherit. And that after that, he will be led to another mountaintop, and from there, sin won't matter anymore. Michael then takes water from the well of life and drops it into Adam's eyes. At first, he sees two men in a field, and they begin to fight before one of them kills the other. Michael tells him that this will be the fate of Adam's first sons, Cain and Abel. Adam is horrified by this. You have to realize he's never seen the death before, at least the death of a human. And he asks, is this what death is? Is this going to happen to everyone? Michael elaborates that there will be many more from the consequences of this world. Fire, flood, famine, disease. He shows Adam something that can only be described as a hospital, as it is some type of structure, full of people dying of different slow and agonizing means. Adam asks if there is a way to avoid any of this, and Michael says yes, through temperance, safety, and wisdom, a peaceful death can be achieved, but chaos and chance have been in the world, and good will be rewarded with bad, and bad will be rewarded with good. He affirms that death in itself is a blessing to a believer, as it allows them to return to what they were always meant to be. But enjoying a fruitful life and experiencing the gifts of God on earth is a blessing in itself as well. From there, Adam has all kinds of visions. He sees these great empires start and wars begin, and he sees a man speaking up against those wars before he's carried away into heaven, this man being Enoch. He sees the entire world become evil, and one man preaching against it, before he builds a boat to escape a flood that resets the world, but then he sees the rainbow and the covenant of God's mercy. This is a lot for Adam, as you could imagine, over the course of a couple minutes, seeing from his children all the way to the flood. So Michael says, I'll just tell you the rest. He speaks of how Noah will be righteous, but generations later, a ruler named Nimrod will try to build a tower to conquest heaven. And from that Tower of Babel, the languages will be separated and humanity will begin to spread across the earth. A lot of the evil that's described comes from the spirit of conquest, with the idea that the reason Nimrod built the Tower of Babel was, we've conquested everything down here, let's go that way. Adam, who again, this is all new information to him, asks Michael how one can wish to rule others if it's so awful. And while Michael remarks that it is true some are ruled over by other people, and it is definitely wrong to rule over other people, several people are ruled over by their own desire and sin. Michael describes sin as this taskmaster who buckles people down and makes them chase their whims and desires, never accomplishing or bettering the world throughout their life. He then speaks of the lineage of Abraham, and how Moses will one day come to take Abraham's people out of Egypt, and they will go to a land that was promised to him in Canaan. He speaks of the lineages from Joshua through the Judges to King David, and how eventually the lineage of righteousness will come to a woman by the name of Mary and her son Jesus. Adam is excited to hear this. He says, that Jesus, that's the guy who's supposed to fight Satan. Tell me of his great battle. And Michael says that there won't be a battle, and instead of coming with the glory and fury of an army in order to make humanity bend to his will, that instead Jesus will step down lower than man, and that he will allow himself to be beaten, hurt, and murdered by them, so that he can take on the debt of humanity in the ultimate and final sacrifice of love. With one act of envy and pride, humanity was condemned, and then with another act, as Jesus becoming man, one man, through an act of love and humility, will save humanity eternal. And throughout all of it, the choice never left. The free will, the beauty of humanity was always there. No matter how corrupted or torn apart it was, it's always there, and that choice has always been open. I know it's very cheesy and weird to cry in YouTube videos, and I hate doing it. Every time I see another YouTuber doing it, I'm like, oh, that's cringe, and then I do it, and I'm like, oh, that's cringe. But it's real to me. It's just a lot to look at these stories. I was the same way with Divine Comedy. I remember when I started reading Paradise Lost, I was like, this is a bad idea. It's gonna get me in the end. And the whole story, I was like, and then the part with Adam calling Eve mother, and like, I've almost got me. And then this final scene comes with Michael explaining the sin debt to Adam, and how it will all be made okay in the end. And to view this beginning of humanity, and have Michael explain where it goes, and just, like I said, it's real. It means a lot. Anyway.
Just add Owens.
Oh, hey, Owen. What are you drinking?
Allow me to pour you Owens Sparkling Cranberry. Enjoy it on its own or mix it with your favorite spirit. Each tiny bubble is full of pure joy.
Wow. That is so refreshing.
Like a cool summer breeze.
Yeah.
Or a dip in the pool on a hot day.
Absolutely.
Or the delightful crunch of fresh grass shoots on a dewy summer's morning.
That might be a little mule specific.
A mule can dream. Just add Owens.
He continues and says that one day Judgment Day will come and hell will be forever destroyed and earth and heaven will be joined as one. And that, as a matter of fact, this new earth, which Adam and Eve will have access to one day, will be far better than paradise itself. Adam ponders these things and says, well, naturally, if several follow God, then several are going to follow Satan as well. So what happens to the followers of God who are persecuted by Satan? Again, Michael says it's a realm of free will and choice, and that persecution will come, and that the believers will have the Holy Spirit and God with them to endure this persecution. Michael goes on to say, as a matter of fact, there will be several who do evil and are followers of Satan, who appear as wolves inside of churches and religious groups, saying that not even all who tout the flag of Christ actually follow him. Adam thinks on these things and says that within himself he contains hope, and that is its own form of paradise. Specifically, he says he carries paradise with him wherever he goes. I love this so much because earlier in the story, when Satan steps into the Garden of Eden and he realizes he doesn't feel better, it's because he carries hell with him, that despair, that hatred. He's always full of it. And that's the reason that he's not going to ask for forgiveness, because he's too bitter. He doesn't want it. And then on the flip side, you have Adam, who has left the garden, but he carries hope with him, and that's his paradise. And the difference is just pure, bitter hatred and envy is counteracted by beings that are us. That yes, while we know all those things and why we can experience and give ourselves away to them, we also have hope, that peace of the garden, that peace of paradise still inside of us. And that's what separates us from the despair of hell. Just as Satan carries hell, we carry Eden. As they come back down off the mountain, Adam comes to Eve, who's waiting on him. Eve's excited to tell him that she has had these dreams of what humanity will be. But at the end of it all, there is a beautiful shepherd, as she refers to it, a Messiah, who makes all of the suffering and travesty worthwhile. And with agony of leaving Eden, but with confidence and hope for the future, the two step out of the garden. Michael leads them out as a cherub waits guard at the gate. Again, this is mentioned in Genesis. And the story ends with these lines. They, looking back, all the eastern side beheld of paradise. So late their happy seat waved over by that flaming brand. The gate, with dreadful faces thronged and fiery arms. Some natural tears they dropped, but wiped them soon. The world was all before them, where to choose their place of rest, and Providence their guide. They, hand in hand, with wandering steps and slow, through Eden took their solitary way. And with that, the story ends. But John Milton has painted this picture of, yes, the tragedy and the downfall of the garden. And I skipped over, a lot of the beauty and the poetry, and hopefully with the sections I did, you can see that the magnitude of what was being decided is hard to even describe. But then there, with Michael's visions to Adam, there is hope at the end of it. So the story ends in this middle area. While, yes, they have to leave the garden, and yes, they cannot know divinity without experiencing death, they carry pieces of that hope with them, and the hope that one day it will all return to a state better than the one they knew. And with those final lines, we have that unity still formed as the first man and the Holy Mother joined hands and stepped into history. What a fascinating look at all this. Again, it's not like, obviously, I believe to be 100% true or accurate, but it doesn't have to be. There are nuggets of beauty and truth that can be found almost anywhere. Milton never claimed this to be some new revelation or new religion from God. It is a picture, a portrait of our history of humanity and the hope we have for the future. Which is why it's a shame to me that most people think of Paradise Lost as the E-Boy Satan story. Which, no joke, if you hear people talk about it, they're like, oh yeah, that's the one where they made him like a sympathetic character. And if by sympathetic you mean they took him from being just like a goat head demonic depiction into a creature with beliefs and ideas, then sure. But the number of people I see who read this story and are like, was Satan the good guy? Is phenomenal. Like, if you look up any academic source about Paradise Lost, you'll find something that's like, oh, was the devil the protagonist? Is this story a critique of heaven? To the degree that whenever I finished reading it and then was reading these articles, I'm like, did I miss something? And I go back and I read parts of it and I'm like, no, everyone's stupid. Got it. Because everyone looks at Satan's arguments whenever he's like, what if we were equal to God? What if we had the power of God? Oh, what if tyranny is heaven, better to reign in hell, blah, blah, blah. And they're all like, this guy raises some good points, which I don't know if we read the same story, but Satan invented, death, as well as the word bad. Like, bad may have been a concept, but it doesn't exist yet. And all the analysis for this story are like, oh, well, maybe he was rebelling against tyranny. I mean, to be forced into subjugation, and by subjugation I mean existence. What a horrific state to be in. Like, I don't know if you knew this, but Satan was lying the entire time. In the flashback, we're shown that he directly despised the Son of God and was jealous of him. And everything he did was just motive for that. He didn't look at the socio-economic factors of heaven and decide that there needs to be change. He felt envy, and he convinced others to follow that envy. And even if there was, some problem, which there wasn't, but even if you feel like there was some problem, is inventing bad justification for that. Like, oh, this archangel, he definitely deserved to be by God's side. That's why it's justified that he made death. Like, I'm sorry, did the snake write this? I know if, like, you're not familiar with the story, that's a weird tangent to go on. But I'm telling you, every analysis of this story is like, wow, it's so wild that a Protestant leader from the 1600s made Satan the good guy. Which, yeah, if you have a second grade reading level, I can only imagine the person who feels that way. And if that's anyone watching, I only apologize a little bit. You're still getting roasted. I can only imagine the person reading the story, and they're just fully wanting to be invested in Satan, so whatever his excuse is, they go along with. Like, they read about him talking to the angels and being like, we can be as powerful as God, and they're like, huh, that's a good point. And then whenever he's like, we should destroy humanity because that's worth it, they're like, wow, what a great point. And then by the end of the story, whenever Satan's just like, well, if I can't have Eden, no one can. I just imagine them like, yeah, same here, man, up top. Isn't the essence of sin cool? Anyway, that's a weird rant to go on. I just thought it was crazy, had to reread parts of the story, and no, I'm the only one who's sane, and you all are crazy. As with most of my videos, I am the one who is definitely not insane, and I'm well aware of everything that's going on and capable of myself, and that's why you'll see several more conspiracy and rabbit hole videos in the future, because I am well adjusted. And hopefully you enjoyed this well-adjusted content. I know I enjoyed making it, and I just want to say thank you for watching. I've always been interested in this story, just the concept, the Garden of Eden from Satan's perspective. It always interests me. And I think it was, I don't want to say divine, it's a little too much. I think it was beautiful. And I love a lot of the imagery and the ideas presented. And again, I don't think of it as like, Bible or anything. I would never like preach from it. But that doesn't mean I can't glean wisdom from it. And I think there was a lot of wisdom that went into it. And I love this story, and hopefully you did too. I don't know how it ranks compared to Divine Comedy. It's a different kind of setup, right? Because Divine Comedy is more so like a classical epic, like a character going through and observing this world around him. Whereas this one's more of a straightforward narrative. And I like both for different reasons. There was a lot, like, I condensed this down. I know, looking at the timestamp, you don't think I condense this down, but I condensed this down a lot. There are a ton of long monologues and dialogue scenes. But I still enjoyed it. I thought it was great, and obviously you saw at the end how it affected me. I also wanted to mention that there is a sequel to Paradise Lost that was also written by John Milton, called Paradise Regained, and it is about what was foreshadowed by Michael, Satan and Jesus, as Satan is trying to tempt Jesus on the mountaintop during the 40 days in the wilderness. So John Milton, with a very similar writing style, and I imagine the same characters beyond just being called the same things. Like I imagine it's the same Satan from Paradise Lost, about him trying to tempt Jesus whenever Jesus was a human on earth. I think that would be fascinating. So we'll see how this video does. We'll see if you all enjoy it. Hopefully you do. I definitely enjoyed making it. And if you all want to see Paradise Regained, let me know, and I will take a look at it. I love these biblical fan fictions, as established. But I love this story. It was great. I understand why it's a classic. It definitely deserves its place. The artwork's incredible, and I loved every aspect of it. So thank you all for watching. Again, check out the Kickstarter. That is continuing to go. Hopefully we can get it.
I want to tell you a story.
I used to believe that...
This account just randomly says, and this same bottle of Spike Nerd was that same Spike Nerd that Mary Magdalene would use to wash Jesus' feet. So it literally gave us the backstory for the perfume that was used to wash Jesus' feet like 30 years later, and it says that his circumcision remains were inside of it. What did I just say? Those were words that came out of my mouth on the internet. I told you this stuff would be weird. It gets worse. It also implies that the wise men who came to see Jesus were Zoroastrians for some reason. And then the story just goes off into space. So there is a mention in the book of John. It's actually at the very end of the book of John. Well, hold on. The book of John ends with a verse, and there are also many other things which Jesus did, the which, if they should be written every one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that should be written. Amen. So this implies that Jesus performed a lot of miracles and feats that aren't mentioned in the Bible. And that makes sense, because there's a lot of verses in the Bible that says Jesus went to this place preaching, and then healed a bunch of people and performed a bunch of miracles, and then it just glosses over it and goes to the next occasion. So we can assume that there are several stories that were not told correctly. So the writers of this heard that, and were like, you know what that means? It is time to get weird. So in the Bible it says that when Jesus was still a baby, his family had to run and hide in Egypt for fear of persecution by the Romans. So it says here that when Jesus was still a baby, and they were on their way into Egypt, that all of the false gods of the Egyptians, which the story is considering demons, began to verbally warn people, saying that the Son of God is coming, and they need to leave. And all the demons just started to leave Egypt. There is a boy who's mentioned as being naked and full of demons, and he's just like twitching around and being possessed. And it says that whenever he was walking towards the place where Mary, Joseph, and Jesus were staying, that Jesus' swaddling clothes, or essentially the clothes that were wrapped around him as a baby, were outside hanging, I guess on like a clothes wire. This little demon boy touched it, and the moment he touched it, it says a demon came out of him in the form of a young man and ran away. So this small child is just like walking, and he hits a cloth, and then a larger man just like phases out of him and runs away. And almost the entirety of the rest of this story is just random people in Egypt having miracles happen because baby Jesus is around. There's a guy. Okay, so basically it's described that Mary and Joseph are staying in essentially a hotel or an inn of sorts. So they're staying in one room, and it says a guy in another room can't enjoy his wife. So in other words, he can't get it up. So he's complaining about this, and the owner of the inn is like, oh, well, I hear that baby boy in there performs miracles. Why don't you go look at him? So the guy goes and looks at him and can now enjoy his wife. And the next day he thanks this random couple he doesn't know because their baby. Yeah. And my favorite thing that happens while they're in Egypt is while they're staying in the inn, a group of women come to the inn, and they're all crying, leading a mule who has like human clothes and like a bracelet draped over him. And all the women are crying, and the innkeeper's like, why are you crying? And they said, this mule is our brother. But a witch tricked him and turned him into a mule, so now we just carry around our mule brother. And again, the innkeeper's like, well, there's a baby in there who can fix that. So Mary takes the baby and just sets it on the mule's back, and he immediately goes poof and turns back into a human. What cracks me up about this is historically that was probably the breaking point for some women. Like, you've got all of the early church fathers gathered around, and they're going through all the epistles and the gospels, like this matches, this doesn't, blah, blah, blah. And then they're reading through this, and there had to be at least one guy who was holding out until the baby turned the mule into this trio of women's brother. And then he's like, okay, yeah, I'm out. It had to be one guy writing this, because if it was like a group of people, there's no way this would have got by. Like, one guy's like, look, you all got to keep the guy with the low libido in the inn, so I get to keep the mule man. And then as Mary, Joseph, and Jesus are leaving Egypt, they are robbed by these two men on the side of the road, because back then, travel had to be on foot, so people would just wait in the wilderness to rob people. So these two men pop out to rob them, and one of the men's like, no, you shouldn't rob these guys. And they get into a fight, and the three are allowed to pass. And as they pass, Jesus talks again. Remember, he's still a baby. And baby Jesus says, "Ah, yes, those two men back there, they are both robbers, and one day they will be crucified alongside me when I am nailed to a tree by the Roman government." And Mary's like, wow. Like, I can't stress this enough. This story felt compelled to give us a fake backstory for the two thieves who died on the crosses next to Jesus.
Coming to you from the upper north, the Niagara region, it's a 2-minute show. And now, here's your host, Dick Lee.
And even set up like a whole Dumb and Dumber gimmick where they can't rob these people over bickering and show like, oh, this was the good one and this was the bad one. And it's just, I love it, what can I say? But that's not even the funniest backstory in this book. So it skips forward a few years to when Jesus is like 5 or 6. And it says that when Jesus was like 5, there was a young boy in the same town he was living in who was possessed by a demon. And the demon compelled this boy to just fight all the time. He bit everyone he was around, and if he couldn't bite anyone else, he'd just start like biting himself. So one day he like gets away from his parents and just starts biting other children, and eventually bites Jesus. And it says that as soon as this boy bites Jesus, that a demon flies out of him, and the boy's no longer possessed. And then the story goes, and that little boy was Judas Iscariot, the same guy who would one day betray him. They gave Judas a backstory. And the story keeps mentioning other non-canonical books of the Bible. Like, it keeps being like, and these are recorded in the Gospel of Perfection, and this is mentioned in the Gospel of Bartholomew. And it just kind of makes it feel like this is a guy advertising his other bestsellers. And then there's a part at the end that's quickly brushed over, but we'll get to more detail on the next entry, where it says as a young boy, Jesus just murdered mean children. Which makes me wonder if this was ever meant to be considered as a legitimate gospel or whatever. Because, like, I mean, several of the inclusions, but especially the ending, does not seem like they're trying to win over the favor of any church leaders. I've seen scholars make the point that this book could just be some kind of combination between themes from the Nativity and local folklore around the Egyptian area at the time, like the statues falling down and the guy who was turned into a mule. But either way, if this was meant to be legitimate, it's not only very stupid, but also very damaging for anyone